Hello friends, welcome to podcast number 3. So I'm going to be talking about what it's like to go mad, and I think I'm in probably the unenviable position of actually having been mad, but also in the fortunate position that I was mad and now I'm not. So I have the ability to look back and actually tell people what it was like. So I made a few notes and I'm just going to launch into it. If you want to like and subscribe, obviously I'd appreciate it. And hopefully you'll get something out of these podcasts. So just to set the scene, there I was in Hong Kong. I was living this lifestyle. That's me, or at least that's a stuntman pretending to be me on top of a building in Wan Chai in Hong Kong. That's the English cover of my book, Eat and Smoke. So it's one man's descent into crystal meth psychosis in Hong Kong's Triad Heartland. Now, psychosis is a form of schizophrenia, and mine was brought on by crystal meth addiction. So I left the Royal Marines Commandos. It's kind of an elite fighting unit here in the UK, and I'd gone to Hong Kong to run a business. It was quite a successful business, and within a short space of time over there, everything started to go wrong. I was addicted to this drug, crystal meth. You can see more about that in my second podcast. And I lost job after job before finally I was working in the red light district, the clubland district in Hong Kong, as a nightclub doorman for the 14K. And if you're not aware, the 14K are Hong Kong's most violent triad family. So I was the doorman in one of their nightclubs. And to say things got a bit savage at times, certainly a bit eye-opening, would be an understatement. But I'll try and focus on the madness, as it were. So I was living, I'd sold my Rolex. I'd sold my Rolex to get the money for a flat because I was homeless. And I'd moved into the flat with a Filipino girl, a bar girl, who needed somewhere to stay. And she moved into the flat the day that I got the keys for the flat. And it was in one of the shittiest parts of Hong Kong. And the flat itself was, well, it was like you'd never get another Westerner living there. They'd just turn their nose up. But to me, I had nothing. I'd been on the drugs so long now, I'd really lost almost everything, including my Rolex, obviously. So I left her in this desolate flat and I headed downtown to the market to go and find a blanket. So at least she could keep warm, right? And I was high on meth, as I was by that time. I'd started taking it kind of infrequently, then it got more regularly, then it just became I just wanted to be on it all the time sort of thing. And I'd not had any massive problems with it till now. To my knowledge, I mean, obviously I was, but when you're addicted, you don't know you're addicted, so you can't see, your life going like this. And I was in that market in Wan Chai, and there was an open fronted shop, and in the front of the shop were a stack of like hospital blankets, those rough grey blankets like we had them in the military. And I picked one up just looking for a price, and I looked and it had a tiny white label on a piece of cotton attached to it. And I turned the label over, and on the back of it was written waste. Just one word, waste. Now, in that instant, my life changed astronomically, because I realised that that tag waste meant that this blanket was one of the ones that the North American settlers and the US Army and Cavalry, they gave to the indigenous Indian population back in the Wild West days, right? The frontier days, purposely infected with smallpox and tuberculosis to wipe out the Indian community. You know this story, right? So I'm in Wan Chai in Hong Kong, looking at this blanket thinking, how can it be one of those blankets that was used to kill Indians? It was just so weird. And I got this cold feeling came over me, and I started to look around, and I got this like sixth sense telling me that this woman who owned the shop, like, she knew. And there's this guy standing on the corner, and I'm looking at him, and he maybe flicked his eyes at me. It was a long time ago, I don't remember, but then I'd be like, he knows. And in that moment, I sensed that the world that I'd lived in all the time I'd been in Hong Kong, which was about 6 or 7 months now, wasn't the world that I thought it was. That there was some massive conspiracy going on, and that I'd just stumbled down the rabbit hole, and I could suddenly see things now for what they were, right? And maybe it wasn't even Hong Kong. Maybe it was my whole life. I started to think, like, who could be in on this, you know? So, cut a long story short, you can see there, that was my first episode of Psychosis. And you might be thinking, well, why didn't you just tell yourself nonsense with the blankets? They can't have been, you know, Indian blankets, blah, blah, blah. But it's not like that. You see, when you're mentally unwell, and it's the first time it's happening to you, you don't know you're mentally unwell. You just think you're completely normal. A bit like with the addiction, you know, you don't know you're addicted. Even when people kept telling you, hey, Chris, you know, you're acting a bit weird. Your life's spiraling a bit there, mate. Come on, you've lost another. You're just like, no, I'm fine. You know, I just need to smoke a bit more of this drug, right? And it's the same with mental illness. If you don't know the signs, you don't know you're in it. And I was to spend the next 3 months like this. And I was in my own world of horror because the people around me couldn't tell this is how I was living and this is how my brain was working. So I'll insert a video here so you can see just a rough approximation of what I was seeing, right? And what was happening was I'd taken the drug so long, the synapses in my brain that should have been firing, you know, drugs like serotonin and dopamine and this kind of thing, that should have been firing signals like this to the receptors, suddenly they were all like going out of sync, right? Do you get it? You know, the chemical balance had changed. Now, I had changed mine simply by taking so much of this crystal meth, right? Ice. So I hate to think, and I feel sorry for someone who goes mad without that input, right? Because at least when I stopped taking the crystal meth, the madness went away, which wouldn't be for a few months, but to have that permanently must be awful, right? So I'm there in Hong Kong, and my episodes would fluctuate. I wouldn't just be full on in that mental state all the time. I'd be high most of the time, but it generally tended to be when I was really high, and I'd phase into it without even knowing. And I started to kind of feel that I was on a quest to unravel whatever this conspiracy was around me, right? And you've got to remember, I'm working in a nightclub in the seediest part of Hong Kong. The guys I worked with, one guy was a hired assassin. He's a Chinese guy, 6'7". Daisu, his name was. The other guy, Chu Chai, he was a street fighter called Majai. In Cantonese, Majai means little horse. He was a street fighter for the 14K and a runner and a kind of errand boy, right? He was savage, this guy. You know, as soon as the fight broke out, you see him just looking for whatever weapon he could pick up just so he could basically cave his enemy's head in with it, right? And I was fascinated in how these guys lived, how the parallels with being in the military were quite a lot. Believe it or not, you know, they wore a kind of underground uniform. They used to wear these white shell suits and white trainers, and they had their clandestine, you know, methods of communication, or, you know, all this. A matchstick in the lips could mean something. It was very deep. So I've got this going on around me, and I'm trying to kind of get to the bottom of this because it really fascinated me. But then I've also got this weird conspiracy that's going on that I don't know is caused by the drugs, right? So one day, excuse me looking at my notes here, one day I was in the kitchen of this rubbish flat where I lived, in this crummy old building. And it had this Indian guy that owned the flat, the landlord, moved back in. It wasn't the best situation. It was pretty fraught, really. But he had one bedroom, I had the other. And one day I was in the kitchen and I happened to look at the white tiles on the kitchen. And there was a procession of ants. And they were going along the base of the tiles like this. They were going up, up. They were making the form of a perfect crucifix, and then they were going off again. And I stared at this for hours thinking, I mean literally, like I would have looked at that for about 2 hours. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe how clever that this conspiracy has got ants involved. It was insane, right? When I went back later the next day and I wasn't so high and I'd calmed down, or maybe I'd had a sleep and I'd woke up and didn't have any drugs, right? I went back in the kitchen and I looked for these ants, and all I saw on the tiles was like a thumbprint. And my Indian housemate, we weren't really mates, but you know, he'd been cooking a chicken, and he'd obviously just done that mark on the tiles accidentally, as he just touched them with a little bit of blood, and those ants had been coming in from outside and following that blood around, and it just happened to be a crucifix. So that just shows you how my mind was completely misinterpreting it, right? So then one day I happened to be looking out the window, and I lived on the top floor. I lived on the top floor of this building, so I was about 70 meters up in the air. It was about a 20-story building. And I looked down, and in the courtyard below, there was 5 or 6 cats lounging around. It's like the courtyard of a restaurant that was in the back of the building opposite, to the rear of the building opposite, so maybe behind a restaurant it was a courtyard. And I looked at one of these cats, and it got up. But rather than get up like a cat, you know, just move normally, it went zzz, and it moved as if it was on a zip wire. And I found this fascinating. I couldn't believe it, and I stared for ages, thinking, they're not cats, they're puppets. They're puppets. Every time one of them moved, it was the same, right? And then a guy came out the back of the restaurant and he was chopping meat. And my mind's telling me, look at him, look. He chops. 2 times at the meet, shuts the door. 2 times at the meet, shuts the door. And I watched this until it got dark. It was just fascinating. And my mind, I'm getting this voice. You often hear madness, people talk about, hearing voices, right? But what I was getting, and I can't speak for other people obviously, but I wonder if they were getting the same. It's like you have 3 voices. You have your voice as I'm talking to you now. Then you have your thoughts voice, like we all think, right? Wonder if I should go to the shops, like that voice. And then I had this 3rd voice that was my psychotic voice. It was coming in between the 2. And so I'd think, I wonder if I should go to the shops. My thoughts are going, yeah, Chris, you should really go to the shop. Go and get that, go and get something to eat. And then the voice in the middle is saying, like, yeah, but like, what's at the shops and why go to the shops? And it's giving me this really contorted, misconstrued message. And that was the voice that's talking to me when I'm looking down at these cats. And the voice starts saying, so puppets, they're puppets, Chris, they're not cats, they're puppets. Where do puppets come from? Puppets come from Asia. Didn't puppets originate in Asia? Wow. So these are puppet. Who is operating them? There was a guy that lived in the building opposite, and his window was on a level with mine, right? But he was a real short Chinese guy, so I only ever could see the top of his head. And this voice in my head, this like my inner voice, you can say, was telling me he was the puppet master and he's controlling these cats. And I'm just finding this fascinating beyond belief. It's like I'm learning stuff I would never have believed was true, and I can't believe it, but it's fascinating. It's just fascinating. And the thought slowly occurred, maybe the whole of Hong Kong is like a big puppet show. Everything, that car I can hear beeping, these car horns, is that all part, is that like the soundtrack in a puppet show? And the sign over there swinging, and the traffic light, is somebody like, controlling all this with switches and pulleys and levers and cables and, and I didn't question, I wasn't like questioning my sanity at all, because it's just how it was, It's like you walk into a bar, right? And you see, I don't know, there's 20 people in the bar and there's a drink on the counter and there's a DJ, you don't go in and question, oh, hang on, I wonder if this is a giant, I wonder if I'm mentally ill and I'm imagining this, or I'm hallucinating, and da-da-da-da-da. No, you go in, you think, this is a bar, I'm going to order a drink and then talk to my friend, This was the same with my life. There was no pointers to tell me that I was imagining things or misconstruing things, right? So it got really bizarre, because crystal meth, I would stay up all night anyway. One time I stayed up for 9 days on end. I talk more about that in my The Truth About Crystal Meth podcast. So one night I was staying up, I was mooching around my this flat, or at least my room in it, and I'm trying to attend to stuff. And to be honest, I was so like off my head and I've gone mad that I'm just like taking things apart. Like I took the air conditioning unit apart, and I have no idea why. I thought somehow I was gonna like make it better. Or maybe it didn't work and I thought I could make it function, and it just ended up with everything else strewn across this shambles of a room, which just become an utter pigsty. There was drink intake. I mean, it looked like what you'd expect of someone who'd lost the plot, I can look back and it was all a great experience, right? Sad at the time, but looking back, it was a great experience. But, you know, to think some people are that challenged mentally that is how they live, it's really not good, guys, you know. So one night I was in my room and I looked out the window, and the guy in the window opposite, he's putting a coffin, and he's leaning a coffin against the glass, and he just looked at me and smiled. And I was just like, what message is he trying to give me? What the hell is that? Looking back in hindsight, what he was probably doing was hanging a door, you know, and he'd taken the door off and he'd leant it up against not the glass window, but, you know, the top of the window. And because of the angle, you know, like the angle, it gone like this. And to me, from where I could see it looked like a coffin lid, right? There was one night where I was staring at this big building in a place called Causeway Bay, and in Hong Kong all the buildings are lit up with neon lights and stuff, right? And I'm staring at this building and I'm looking at the lights, and this voice in my head is telling me it's that building in the film King Kong. And I honestly was expecting King Kong to come scrambling around this building, clutching Fay Ray, you know, in his hand at any moment. And, you know, things got really nasty. I mean, I was losing the plot on crystal meth big time. My place was just a mess. I was starting to have nervous breakdowns, but I didn't know what a nervous breakdown was. I certainly never thought I'd have one, but I was having them, and the way they were manifesting is I was just getting emotionally drained and so tired from staying up that I, you know, like I'd smash the place up out of anger and frustration. And at work, this conspiracy had morphed itself. Well, it hadn't morphed. In the club I worked in, which was run by the 14K Triads, it was frequented by a lot of expats, so Westerners, you know, Americans, Brits, Filipinos, Indians, maybe the odd French guy, you know. I mean, Hong Kong was a British colony back then. And when I did some research when I was writing my book, Eating Smoke, I came across something called the Foreign Triad. And I was like, because for 15 odd years, I'd wondered what this thing was I'd uncovered. I'd noticed that a lot of these expats would communicate amongst each other using the exact same kind of secret sign language that the Hong Kong Triads would use. But at the time, everything just blended into one. I've got this weird puppet show thing going on. I've got cats on strings. I'm working for the Triads. I've got these foreign expats who all seem to know more about what's going on in Hong Kong than I am. And I started to get the impression that they wanted me to join their Foreign Triad, right? And people were asking me if I'd sell drugs. You know, could I sell drugs for them? And I didn't know if this was like a loyalty test. And it really got quite nasty. In fact, one night they set me up to be murdered. Yeah, I'm going to talk more about that in another podcast. Of course, I talk about it in my book. It wasn't what it seemed, and you know, part of that was to do with my illness, I guess you could say. But yeah, I really just started to think that everything was conspiracy. I mean, I just didn't know what was going on. My family at home involved in this was like the Marines when I was in the Marines. Is that a part of it? And I would literally sometimes be talking almost a different language to people, at least from a sort of, you know, a mental perspective. Like I was in someone's house and there was a candle on the table, and it had been blown out, and the wick, it just made a little V shape, you know, like a wick of a candle does, right? It just made a V shape. And I stared at it, and my friend said to me, Chris, what are you looking at? And I just went, bird. And he went, oh yeah. But here's the thing, the V in the candle looked like when an artist draws a bird, right? But to me, it was a bird. There's no, I mean, I didn't think it was like going wow, 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 or anything like that, or, you know, shitting on people or whatever. I just thought it was a bird. And my friends agreeing with me, not really knowing that I'm absolutely in a different world. There was one time I would hallucinate so badly that I was walking down the street and I was staring into a shop front. And the shop, it was kind of closed down or something. And as I stared in, everything came to life. It was like some kind of weird Terry Gilliam deep film. And this shop and everything in it, all the front, you know, the window display, which was, it was like an empty shop or something. It all just took on a life of its own, and I started to see a Wild West scene in there, and people drinking and shooting and, you know, yeehaw! And I just absolutely, that's what I saw. And I stared for just hours into this empty shop front, and there were people walking past, and I heard these girls going, what's he doing? And the other girl, she's like, I don't know, but he always does this, you know. And I was like, well, I know what I'm doing. You know, is it not obvious what I'm doing? I'm looking at this Wild West scene, and no sooner would it be a Wild West scene, it would change to me. Their eyes just seemed to be black, like dull, almost like satanic. And I'm thinking, oh my God, these kids are blind. Shit. Is everybody in Hong Kong blind? Have I been so stupid I haven't... And I became convinced that everybody I knew in the red light district, you know, the clubland where I worked, were all blind. And they'd all come to Hong Kong because Hong Kong was a place where blind people could come and live together in like this community. And I actually truly believe this. And I went out the door and I went to see an old friend of mine because it suddenly occurred to me now that my friend is blind. That's why he's behaving strange to me at times, you know. And of course I went to see my friend, and he's like, I'm like, dude, are you alright? You know, are you like seeing things okay? He's like, yeah. I'm like, is the way clear? He's like, yeah, Chris, like, why wouldn't it be? I'm okay, just wait there. And I started cleaning his house, moving stuff out the way so he wouldn't trip over on it, right? It was, you know, it was pretty fucking insane, you know, it just was. So, it all started to come to a head where in the end I felt so persecuted that nobody understood me. All my friends had kind of deserted me. I lost another job. I lost my job in the club. I got a job, believe it or not, I was teaching a school while in psychosis. You know, I wasn't a danger to anyone at any time. Like most people that are mentally ill, they're only a danger to themselves. And that was my case. I wasn't going to hurt anyone. I'm a person, I always loved everybody. And that's like just how my heart is, you know, and it was no change when I was ill. But I was teaching in this school, and I was crazy enough anyway, you know, ex-Marine becomes a school teacher. You can imagine that there's, you know, the teacher came up to me once, she said, Chris, the children say that your lesson is their favourite lesson and you are their favourite teacher. And I was so destroyed by that point. This broke me. I went home and I just cried my eyes out that like everything's going wrong in my life. No one understands me. There's this conspiracy going on, and yet these children, they just love me for who I am, you know. And I was due to go to school one day and teach, and maybe I had to get there for 3 in the afternoon, and I became engrossed in an Anthony Robbins self-help book that I always used to have, and I got so engrossed in it, and I'm reading the passageways, and Tony is saying, yeah, there's something coming up in your life soon, it's going to be great, and it'll change everything, and it's just a self-help book. To me, it's become like this manual that's telling me what's happening in my actual life, and I'm thinking, my God, something's happening today and it's going to change my life. And in that moment I thought, oh my God, this thing that's going to happen, like it will change my life, because I'll suddenly understand this weird conspiracy that's going on, and I will know my part in it. And I know why everyone's been like setting me this challenge for these months, And I'm like, and I'm talking to this voice in my head, and I'm like, do I have to go to school today? It's going, what do you think? I'm like, yeah, where is school today? School's in the stadium. Like in my mind's telling me that I've got to go to school, but the school's in a stadium. And the stadium is up there in the New Territories in Hong Kong, which is like where my school was, right? It's just an area north of Hong Kong. And my mind's telling me that the whole stadium has become a school, but if I go up there, every single person that I've ever known, like all my people I went to school with, my teachers, people I was in the military with, all the people I worked in nightclubs, even the managers that had fired me, because I'd lost the plot or I was rapidly losing it, I figured they'd all be in this stadium and they'd all be like, well done, son, you figured it out at last, that's genuinely how what my mind was saying to me. And so I started to, I'm scrabbling around on the floor thinking, right, have a wash, get washed, get your shoes polished, get your shirt ironed, get yourself to school in the stadium, And then the voice says, it's too late now. What do you mean it's too late? Oh, school's out for summer. What? And I checked my watch. I had this cheap Casio like this that I'd bought to replace my Rolex, I'm like, oh shit, I'm completely late for school. I've missed school. And so I just didn't go. I didn't go to that job that I love with those kids that I love, which is, probably worked out for the best. But I was gutted. I was so gutted. I was so angry. There was only one thing for it. I would have to go to the harbour in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's a big cargo place, right? There's loads of freight ships and liners and these big tall cranes that go up in the sky. I knew what I had to do. I had to go to one of those cranes in the harbour, climb the, what are they, 100 feet high? I had to climb off the top, and then I would dive off into the harbour. That, if I would do that, that was it. I proved myself to everyone. These triads, these foreign triads, these puppet guys, this weird conspiracy. I'd dive off into the harbour, and everything would come good. I would prove my worth, and I wouldn't have to keep up this mad quest for what the hell is going on, And that was it. I set off to do it. But I made sure I took my boogie box, they used to call them ghetto blasters, boom boxes back in the day. I took one of those, even though I had no batteries for it, and I took the Anthony Robbins book. I really was ill. Oh, you can laugh now, right? But I took them, and that was it. And I went for a walk, and I walked, and I walked, and I walked all afternoon. It started getting the evening. It started going, and I walked, and I'm reading this book. I stopped at this courtyard in between these skyscrapers, and there was 2 young lads, I don't know, about 10 years old, kicking a ball, and I just put my boogie box down and put my book down, and I just went and joined them and played football. And they didn't say anything to me. I didn't say anything to them. They just smiled, kicked me the ball. We just played football, and it was just so nice to be accepted, you know, when I was getting all this rejection everywhere I went. And then I continued on my quest, and I bought this guitar. I looked in a window and there's this guitar, and everything about this guitar, including the pattern in its sound hole, the sticker they put in the guitar sound hole, it was sending me these messages that, like, this, you know, I need to buy this guitar. It's going to help me understand what's going on. So I bought this guitar, and like, I'd lost all my jobs now. I had no more money. I owed £7,000 to the bank. That's like 12,000 US dollars, something like that. 15,000 euros or something. And like, I had no money. I hadn't paid my rent. I couldn't pay the landlord. I'd smashed up like this place that I was living in with him, and it was all just going wrong. And I used nearly all my remaining money to buy this guitar, thinking that if I learnt to play it, it would give me the answers to this mystery. And I continued on this walk, and I got to a garage, and I just took all my remaining Hong Kong dollars and coins, and I shoved them all in the charity box. And I thought, yeah, that will fix everything, you know. It did. So that evening I got back to my building. I was almost like cold, even in the tropics. I was lonely, I was skint, I was hungry, I was tired, I was off my head, and I was mad, right? And you have to read my book to find out how this happened, but I ended up going up to the roof. Wasn't suicidal, was nothing about that. Like, I hadn't lost any of my self-respect. I still love myself. I didn't really know what was happening to me, but I went up to the roof, and there was a cable going across to the other building, and there was a water pipe attached to it. And in my mind, all my commando training had trained me for the day when I would crawl across this cable, and we're 70 meters up in the air. It's not quite a skyscraper, but it's a massive tenement block. And I started to crawl across this cable, genuinely believing when I got to the other side, like, this whole thing will be over, done and dusted. I will know what's going on. I'll have worked out this conspiracy. Everyone will, you know, love me again, and it will be good, right? And I got about 5 feet out on that cable, and I'm swinging. I'm laying on my chest like we were taught in the military, right? And I'm like swinging like this, and I'm looking down, and the people are tiny, and the cars are tiny, and yeah, I won't finish that story, because, like, if you want to know it, you'll read my book. I'm not trying to plug my books, by the way, guys. It's just somebody watching. My story might help you, and that's all I care about, right? So I'm, please don't think I'm just doing this to sell books. Well, I mean, I'm not going to argue if I do, right? But, I'm up there and I'm swinging, and I started to think about my family back home. And I started to think about my little brother, who I hadn't seen for over a year now, and he's like my best friend, and I haven't spoke to him even on the phone for ages. And like, what's he gonna think if he gets a phone call to say your brother threw himself off a skyscraper in Hong Kong? Because that's how they'd report my death, right? They'd say I was a drugged up loser who'd thrown himself off a building, and it wasn't true. I mean, yeah, I was drugged up, but I didn't think I was a loser, and I certainly wasn't suicidal. And yeah, I had a real moment of clarity, and it's kind of in the book, so it all came to a head one night when I got on a bus. I got thrown out of that apartment, that flat. I'd lost my job working for the Triads. I'd lost my job teaching English at the school. I had no money left. I was staying with a friend who he knew I smoked too much of that drug, but he didn't really understand that I was completely mad, you know. He was Chinese, so I guess I had like a buffer there that he didn't kind of know when I was being weird or not. And one day I was travelling back to his place on a bus, and everybody on the bus was, you know, I'd done my best to learn Cantonese, the Hong Kong language, or the language in southern China, and my brain's not interpreting the words right. I'm hearing them all wrong, and all I'm hearing is people talking about me, and it was insane. I couldn't take it. I was absolutely in bits. It was, imagine being on a bus and there's like 30 people on board and they're all talking about you, and they're all like, yeah, that guy, yeah, he lost his job. And in fairness, Cantonese culture can be very harsh. There's a lot of differences with Western culture. Cantonese can be very scathing. They can just say their thoughts. They think they value working hard in a career. They don't value things like taking drugs, you know. So I had enough reason to be paranoid, as it were. But on this bus journey, it just did me in. I couldn't stand it. I just ran off the bus. And yeah, fast forward. This book, 40 Nights, is all about my recovery. I did it with no medicine, no doctors, no friends, because all my friends went, no money, no AA meetings, none of that. I just did it, just me. Little by little, I worked the pieces out, you know. But I was back in the UK, and you can't get crystal meth in the UK that easily, right? So as the crystal meth left my body, the madness went away. It came back a couple of times when I took amphetamine, which I continued to do so for like over a year, right? And it wasn't for months and months. I even met someone who was a speed dealer, who was a drug dealer who sold speed, right? And but he took heroin. And I said, why do you take heroin when we've got like all this speed? Dude, that doesn't make sense to me, you know. And he's like, oh no, I had psychosis, I'm not going there again. And even then, after I'd had psychosis all these months, I didn't know what psychosis was, and I didn't know. I could guess what he was talking about. It's like some kind of schizo-mental disease, isn't it? Psychosis. It didn't occur to me that's what I'd been in, because I still didn't know. And it was a very gradual process of reflecting back on what went on Hong Kong, trying to pick out like what was true, like the Hong Kong triads obviously were true. You know, I'd lived in that building. I mean, things like the physical stuff was all true, but like the cats on strings, fuck, that can't have happened, couldn't it? The puppet master running the whole of Hong Kong, nah, that didn't happen, you know. The Foreign Triad turned out to be true. There's an article about it online, funnily enough. But, you know, buying the guitar, thinking it was going to give me answers, that was, yeah, I was kind of hoping there, wasn't I, you know? And it really took me months to realise, oh my God, Chris, you were fucking ill, mate. You were really ill. Shit, you were so lucky you didn't kill yourself, you know, accidentally, I mean. Or the triads, you didn't upset them, and they took, you know, my friend in Hong Kong got attacked by 12 triads that jumped out of a transit van. They chopped him to bits with meat cleavers, right? His face looked like he'd run into a tennis net at 100 miles an hour. They chopped his thumb off. It was hanging like down here. And that turned out to be mistaken identity. So, yeah, you don't like mess with these people, right? So, that's that's the story of how I went mad, and how I'm lucky to, you know, be back again with all my faculties. And, The doctor said I would never recover, but I just chose to ignore them, really. So yeah, plenty more to talk about, guys. Maybe the next podcast I'll talk about what it's like to work for the Hong Kong Triads, what they're all about. If you know, for those of you that don't know me, I'm a pilot, I'm a skydiver, I'm a triathlete, I'm a 1,000-mile ultra runner. I ran 1,000 miles non-stop last year to raise money and awareness of veteran suicide. I'm a graduate in youth work. I'm a drug specialist or substance misuse specialist. I'm a best-selling author. I'm a life coach. I've lived, worked and travelled in 80 different countries across all 7 continents. I'm an Antarctic explorer. I've dived on icebergs in the southern polar circle. So yeah, I got a few stories, you know, a few podcasts left to do, and I really hope you'll join me for them. So thank you for listening to this one. Please like and subscribe. You know the score there, right? And share. And I'll see you soon, friends. Hello, friend. I hope this finds you well. My name's Thrall. I'm a former Royal Marines Commando, and I fought my way back from chronic trauma and addiction to live, work and travel in 80 countries across all 7 continents, achieving all of my dreams and goals along the way. Now I pass my simple system on to other people, but I can only help you if you like and subscribe. So please do so, because you get one life, and if you live it right, one is enough.